同じだよね。Atomic.
Last time on the Eminence in Shadow, our main characters explored a mysterious facility filled with memories. Alpha and Delta face off against an empowered Nelson in a vicious battle. Elsewhere, Sid and Aurora reach the sanctuary's core, but a door only a hero can open blocks their path. We cut to Delta and Alpha battling Nelson. As Delta effortlessly slices through Nelson's copies, she can't shake the feeling that something is amiss. Nelson sheds some light on the situation, revealing that the further they venture into the center of the sanctuary, the more their powers are depleted. Alpha reinforces this point, highlighting that simultaneously, Nelson grows stronger the closer he gets to the center. Despite his desire to delve even deeper, Nelson ultimately concedes that this current proximity should be enough to defeat them. Meanwhile, Sid and Aurora encounter a new memory, a war-torn battlefield littered with casualties. They find young Aurora, who is once again in tears, as she tries to grab Sid's sword with the intention of ending the memory by killing herself. Just as she's about to strike, however, the dead return to life and start attacking them. Aurora explains that the sanctuary is rejecting them. Sid ponders what would happen if Aurora were to die, and she surmises that she would simply return to the first room where they met. As the Epsilon group stumbles upon an enemy, they come across a sick individual who, as Epsilon passes through, mysteriously disappears. Epsilon deduces that this must have been a memory that materialized in response to their presence. They stumble upon an archive filled with information about the possessed and realize that they could have fallen victim to the same fate if they hadn't met Shadow. Ita, drawing on knowledge from Shadow, has created Polaroid cameras and they take pictures of the information they've discovered. As Sid and Aurora sit down, Sid muses on the fact that the Chosen One must be a direct descendant. Meanwhile, Delta continues to obliterate Nelson, who is in shock at her power. Alexia, watching the fight, ponders if Delta is really working with Shadow. She notes that Delta's fighting style is nothing like Shadow's sophisticated techniques, as Delta defeats another wave of Nelson's copies. The memory breaks, and Nelson is left stunned by her abilities. Alpha and Epsilon join the fray, and Alpha explains that they have completed their investigation and are now ready to leave. Nelson is shocked that they are retreating, but Alpha calmly explains that their goal was to cut off the source of power, and they have now learned the sanctuary's defenses. With this information, Alpha promises that they will return again. As Sid and Aurora sit, Aurora ponders the sword in front of the door and explains that it is written on it that it can cut the chains. Sid attempts to pull it out, but realizes that he is not the Chosen One. Aurora then reads a sign that states the Holy Sword can only be drawn by direct descendants. She is surprised that Sid was able to decipher the magical inscription so quickly. Sid explains that he is well versed in all standard formulas and has memorized countless magical scripts. With no other option to open the door, the two sit and wait. As Alpha and the rest depart, Nelson's thoughts are consumed by what he should say to the group. He considers explaining his motives for luring them to the sanctuary with the intention of exposing their identities and using Alpha's blood to perfect the beads. Suddenly, a notification flashes on his screen, alerting him to someone's presence in the sanctuary center. Sid turns to Aurora and asks if she wants to disappear, but Aurora explains that once the core is destroyed, she will be freed from this eternal prison of memories. Sid reassures her that things will soon work out, anticipating the arrival of the protagonist, who he believes will be able to extract the sword. However, to Sid's surprise, Nelson makes an appearance, leading him to wonder if this is one of those scenarios where the antagonist tries to stop the protagonist. But then he spots Olivier, who has the same face as Alpha, and he knows that things are about to get ugly. Nelson orders Olivier to attack, and Sid steps forward to face her. Despite her formidable strength, Sid manages to block her attacks, but he is eventually sent flying and his sword is shattered. Nelson can't comprehend why Sid is still smiling, but Sid realizes that he indeed is. The fight continues with Olivier injuring Sid, who notes that the battle is tedious without conversation and that she has no heart to answer his questions. Nelson orders Olivier to finish Sid off, but Aurora jumps in and pleads for him to stop. She knows that no human can defeat Olivier, but she thanks Sid for giving her new memories. Nelson offers to spare Sid's life if Aurora agrees to help him, but Sid interrupts, declaring that he doesn't need anyone's help and that they shouldn't assume he will lose. Frustrated, Nelson orders Olivier to kill Sid, and she jumps in and stabs him. But to everyone's shock, Sid opens his right eye, revealing that he had planned this all along. He got them, and the outcome of the battle has taken a dramatic turn. Wow, what an epic fight! Before we continue, take a moment to answer the question of the day: what is the best weapon to have in a fantasy world? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out, and now, back to the video. As Olivier unsheathed her sword and lunged forward, Sid was ready. With lightning-fast reflexes, he grabbed her arm and sank his teeth into her neck, tearing it open in a brutal display of power. Nelson watched in awe, wondering how Sid was still alive after being stabbed. Sid explained to Nelson that if you protect your vital organs and arteries, it's relatively easy to survive a stabbing, but Nelson was still stunned, amazing that a mere kid without any magic could defeat Olivier. He quickly realized, however, that she was just a copy. With a flick of his wrist, Nelson summoned countless copies of Olivier, each one eager to take down Sid. But Sid was ready for the challenge. He opened his right eye and with a burst of magic, he defeated them all. Nelson was astounded, unable to believe that Sid was using magic. Sid explained that he had simply tempered with the magic until it was too solid to be absorbed. It had taken him some time, but it was something simple. Despite his newfound knowledge, Nelson ordered the Olivier copies to kill Sid. The battle was intense, with Sid fighting off the copies with everything he had. But as his wounds continued to bleed, he knew that the playtime was over. He decided to take out all the copies at once and began casting his ultimate spell, I Am the All-Range Atomic. Just as Sid was about to finish his spell, one of the Oliviers snuck up behind him and stabbed him in the heart. But even this was not enough to stop him. Unfazed, Sid finished his spell, unleashing an explosion of magic that obliterated all the Oliviers, along with the chained door and everything else. Aurora was shocked by the sheer amount of magic that Sid possessed. It was clear that this was a power not to be underestimated. As Sid wakes up with Aurora by his side, he is shocked to see her still there, especially after being stabbed in the heart. However, he explains that he used magic to move his heart to the other side, which surprises Aurora even more. But then, she begins to fade away and confesses that she was the one who called Sid there. She admits that she lied about many things, but Sid is still fine with it, as he has grown fond of her. Aurora reveals that for a long time she wanted to disappear and forget everything, but now she has a memory she doesn't want to forget, and she thanks Sid for that. In turn, Sid also expresses his gratitude, stating that he had a good time too. As she disappears completely, she leaves Sid with instructions on what to do if he ever meets the real her. Meanwhile, Alexia, Rose, and Natsume come together to assess the aftermath of Sid's spell. Feeling frustrated with her own weakness, Alexia expresses her desire to start an organization with Rose and Natsume to gather information and decide on their next steps. Both Rose and Natsume agree, and although they have no concrete plan, they form a team. Epsilon reports to Alpha about the destruction of the sanctuary and the disappearance of the Holy Sword and the magical core. Alpha comments that this was the simplest and most effective solution, and he congratulates Shadow. Epsilon also reveals that Beta is working with Alexia and may be infiltrating her inner circle. Epsilon wonders if she should report this to Shadow, but Alpha assures her that he already knows everything. Meanwhile, a man tries to convince Gamma to buy a prime property in Madlid and open her shopping center there. Gamma isn't sure at first, but as one of her employees tells her that they have found petroleum, Gamma decides to buy every property in that street and explains she wants to redevelop the city and make it the greatest in the Vegalta Empire. Meanwhile, Alpha and the rest guess that Delta is still in the Sacred Land, but decide to leave her alone as they believe she will return home when she gets cold. Alpha recalls a previous experience with Sid, and she explains that they need to start training the girls as they will be facing the cult and need to enhance their individual strengths. Alpha receives news that the Royal Chancellor Perv Asshat will be visiting the royal capital of Midgar. Alexia explains to Iris that the Archbishop is part of the cult. To keep the sanctuary a secret, they need a big organization, and Alexia wants to investigate the divine teachings. Iris had suggested the same thing to their father, but he told them not to do anything. However, Iris feels that if she wins the Bushin Festival again, she will have more backing and support from the people, and her father will have to listen to her. Alexia wonders if the cult or Shadow Garden won't get involved, but Iris is confident in her sword skills. Iris wonders why Alexia went into the sanctuary as he didn't tell her to do so. Alexia then acts a bit dumb and excuses himself and leaves. Iris notes to herself that the Crimson Knights lost their strongest members and probably won't be able to rebuild them. The Night Order supports her, but she guesses they hate her as she took their strongest members and let them die. Iris feels she needs to win the tournament and show them a path. We then cut to Rose training. Suddenly she feels strange and demonic possession appears on her chest. At the start of episode 15, the Bunshin Festival begins. The strongest warriors from all corners of the world converge to participate. Sid, inspired by the sight, yearns to join the tournament and showcase his hidden strength. Undeterred by the prospect of being seen as weak, Sid visits Gamma and requests her help with a disguise. Although Gamma questions his motives, Sid remains tight-lipped. With a special slime gel, Gamma transforms Sid into Mundane Man, a lazy Dark Knight who was disowned and died as a mediocre fighter. However, Anne Rose, who had previously summoned an ancient warrior, recognizes Sid in his disguise and warns him not to participate in the tournament. Sid, confident in his disguise, brushes off her warning and walks away with a smirk. Quentin, a seasoned participant, soon intervenes and advises Sid to heed Anne Rose's warning. Frustrated by Sid's defiance, Quentin beats him up in an alley. Despite the violence, Sid maintains his weak demeanor, knowing that he is capable of defeating Quentin, but has no intention of revealing his true strength just yet. Anne Rose eventually stops Quentin. Anne Rose explains her reason for letting Quentin beat Sid. However, she expresses her surprise at the fact that Sid wasn't hurt, even though Quentin was putting up quite a fight. She then introduces herself and inquires about Sid's name, which he reveals to be Mundane Man. With this newfound information, Sid proceeds to meet with Skell Atal, who has a keen interest in making bets and winning money in the tournament. Skell Atal explains the proceedings of the tournament, starting with the preliminary rounds and only the strongest participants proceeding to the main event. He also mentions the favorites, but Sid wants to keep his powers hidden and is considering a strategy to defeat stronger opponents without revealing his true abilities. As Sid leaves, he bumps into Anne Rose again, who tells him about her close friendship with Alexia and Natsume Kafka. She also explains her upcoming meeting with her father and the introduction to her fiancé, Perv Asshat. Anne Rose reveals her past as a princess from a land of art and culture, but her desire to become a knight has led her to disappoint and betray people in her life. Despite this, she remains steadfast in her beliefs and ideals, which may result in further betrayals. She asks Sid if he will continue to believe in her, to which he confirms with a nod. We cut to Sid and Skell watching a match between two contenders. Despite Sid's disinterest in the fight, Skell and Goldo Kinmeki are fully immersed in the action. Skell is gathering data to make more informed bets, and Goldo is fascinated by this approach. He explains that he too tabulates data in order to win. As the next match begins, Gonzales Macomb versus Mundane Man, Sid takes a brief break, but Goldo takes the opportunity to analyze the fight. He notes Gonzalez's experience and strength, demonstrated by his glinting eyes and arrogant smile, with a battle power of 1,364. In contrast, Mundane Man appears weak, with a battle power of only 33. However, as soon as the fight begins, Gonzalez falls, much to the disappointment of the crowd. But Anne Rose saw Mundane's quick punches to Gonzalez's chin, proving that he was the true winner. Goldo is impressed by this outcome and sees the opportunity to bet on weaker fighters. The next day, Goldo is set to face Mundane in the 4th round. Skell tries to convince Sid to give him all of his money to bet on Goldo, but Sid refuses. The next morning, Skell wakes Sid with shocking news. Rose has stabbed her fiancé and fled. The excitement and drama of the tournament continues to escalate. What a way to end an episode. Why did Rose attack her fiancé? What will Sid do in response? Find out on our next recap of The Eminence in Shadow.